Ethan Ward lived on a quiet stretch of land where the plains met the hills, far from the noise of town. His ranch was wide, peaceful, and often silent except for the sound of wind moving through the grass and the low calls of cattle in the distance. People in the nearby town of Red Mesa knew him well enough to greet him by name, but they also knew he kept his world small. Some said he liked it that way. Others whispered that he was hiding something from his past. Only Ethan knew the truth, and he kept it locked inside. He wasn't an unfriendly man. When someone waved, he waved back. When someone needed a hand fixing a wagon wheel or lifting a heavy crate, he helped without complaint. He wasn't cold or rude, just quiet. He lived with purpose and structure, waking before the sun, tending to chores, repairing fences, checking water lines, and spending long evenings mending leather or polishing tools. His life had no one else in it, but it wasn't an empty life. It's just a careful one. Years earlier, he had been engaged to a young woman from town, a girl with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. She had been kind, and he had cared for her deeply. They had made plans, spoken about building a home, raising a family, and planting fruit trees behind the house. But life had shifted quickly. She grew restless with the quiet ranch life and decided she wanted something bigger, louder, and far more exciting. One morning, she left a short note and rode away, leaving Ethan alone with a ring and silence that felt heavier than any storm. After that, he promised himself he would never offer his name or his home unless he could do it with full trust. He wanted something real, not something that faded when days grew slow or challenges appeared. So he kept to himself, turned down every polite offer of company, and focused on what he understood: land, cattle, quiet mornings, and long nights of work. As time passed, women in town continued to notice him. Some admired how responsible he was. Others liked his calm nature, but he refused every invitation, every attempt to catch his attention, every hint someone dropped. He didn't wish harm or disrespect. He simply believed it would be unfair to lead someone on when he wasn't ready to open his heart again. People started creating stories about him. Some said he was too damaged to love. Others said he was too proud. Only a few understood that some men heal slowly, and that Ethan valued honesty over comfort. Whatever the town guessed, Ethan didn't argue. He preferred to focus on what he could control, taking care of the ranch and keeping his mind steady. One dry afternoon, when the sun was high and the air felt warm enough to make the sky shimmer, Ethan heard a sound he did not expect: footsteps, slow and careful, approaching the barn. He set down the saddle he was repairing and stepped outside, wiping his hands on a cloth. A woman stood by the corner of the barn, holding a small cloth bag by her side. Beside her was a boy, no older than 6 or 7, thin but alert, watching everything around him with sharp, quiet eyes. The woman wore simple clothes, worn but clean, and her long dark hair was tied at the back. Her posture was straight, steady, and strong. The moment Ethan saw her, he knew she had come from a hard road. She was an Apache widow, something he learned from the details in her face, her clothing, and the careful way she watched every movement he made. She carried herself not like someone broken by hardship, but someone shaped by it, someone who had learned to rely on her own strength when the world refused to help. Ethan stepped forward with a calm voice. "Afternoon," he said, not wanting to startle them. The woman lifted her chin slightly. "Good afternoon," she replied. Her voice sounded tired, but not weak. Tired like someone who had walked through miles of dust with no guarantee of shelter at the other end. Ethan waited, giving her space to speak first. She seemed like the type of person who valued respect and would not appreciate being questioned too quickly. She rested her hand on her son's shoulder, steadying him. Then she looked Ethan in the eyes with a directness that surprised him. "My name is Tala," she said. "This is my son, Little Hawk." Ethan nodded politely. The boy didn't look frightened, only cautious. Tala took a slow breath, gathering her courage. And then she asked the question that would change Ethan's life forever. The question that held no hesitation. No flirtation, nothing but raw honesty. "Do you want a wife? Or just a warm roof?" Ethan froze, not because the question offended him, but because it shocked him with its plainness. No woman had ever spoken to him in such a straightforward way. It was as if she had reached past all the empty words people used, past the gossip, past the casual flirting, and gone straight to the truth. She wasn't making an offer. She wasn't begging. She wasn't bargaining. She was testing him, testing what kind of man he was. He saw the truth of her situation in her eyes. She wasn't asking for romance. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was seeking safety, stability, and a future for her son. Life had removed comfort from her world. Now she stood before him with nothing but honesty, because honesty was all she had left to give. For a long moment, Ethan didn't answer. His silence wasn't rejection or confusion, it was caution. He knew that words spoken in a hurry could lead to promises neither person could keep. He saw how tired the woman was. He noticed the dust on her shoes, the way her son held her hand tightly, and the quiet strength in her eyes. He felt respect rise inside him, strong and immediate. Tala watched him carefully, waiting for any sign of the kind of man he truly was. She didn't flinch, didn't back down, didn't look away. She had risked everything by coming to his ranch. She deserved a thoughtful answer. Finally, Ethan spoke, slow and steady. "Ma'am, before I answer anything, let's get you and the boy some water. You look like you've had a long road." Tala didn't thank him loudly or show dramatic relief. She simply nodded once, a gesture of acceptance that came from someone who valued dignity over display. Little Hawk followed closely as Ethan led them toward the house. Inside, he offered them seats at the table and poured water into tin cups. Tala drank slowly, but her son finished his cup in seconds. Ethan filled it again, without saying a word. He knew what hunger and thirst looked like, and the boy didn't try to hide his need. Ethan brought out bread, dried meat, and a jar of preserved peaches. He placed everything on the table and stepped back, giving them room. Tala encouraged her son to eat first, letting him take the larger portion, while she took only a little. Her restraint didn't look forced. It looked practiced, the habit of someone who had always put a child's needs before her own. Ethan watched quietly. He wasn't observing them like a judge, he was learning. This woman hadn't come to trick him or trap him. She had come with truth. She had come because she believed he was a fair man. And she had come with nothing except her courage and her son. When the boy finally relaxed enough to smile faintly, Ethan felt something shift in the room. The silence was no longer heavy. It was gentle. After they ate, Ethan asked softly, "How long have you been traveling?" Tala hesitated before answering. "Since last winter," she said. "My husband passed. The camps changed. Some places welcome a widow. Others don't." Ethan knew enough about the land to understand the weight behind her words. A woman alone with a child faced more dangers than most people could imagine. She had survived those dangers with only her determination and her willingness to keep walking. Her eyes settled on him again. "I heard you were a man who does not pretend. That is why I came." Ethan felt something stir inside him. Not love, not yet, but a kind of respect that was deeper than admiration. This was a woman who didn't waste time on lies. She had asked him a question that would scare most men because she needed truth more than safety. Tala didn't ask again. She didn't push him. She simply sat there with the quiet strength of someone willing to stand. Alone if necessary, Ethan realized that the question she had asked, "Do you want a wife or just a warm roof?" was not about her offering herself. It was about finding out whether he was the kind of man who wanted comfort without responsibility, or someone who believed in building something real. As he watched her and her son sitting at his table, sunlight falling softly through the window, Ethan understood one thing clearly the moment he answered her. His life would take a turn he could not undo, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid of that. Ethan woke early the next morning, long before sunrise, the way he always did. The ranch demanded discipline, and he had lived by a steady routine for years. But that morning felt different. When he looked toward the small guest room across the hall, he remembered that he was no longer alone in his quiet house. The soft murmur of a child sleeping and the gentle creak of wood as someone shifted their weight reminded him that Tala and her son were still under his roof. He walked silently into the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, simple things he knew well: eggs, biscuits, and coffee. As he worked, he wondered whether Tala planned to stay for a day or two or longer. Her question from yesterday still echoed in his mind, carrying a weight he hadn't fully sorted through yet. He didn't want to make assumptions. He didn't want her to feel trapped, but he also knew she hadn't come without purpose. When he heard footsteps behind him, he turned to see Little Hawk standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. The boy looked shy, but more rested than the day before. Ethan offered him a small smile. "Morning, Little Hawk," he said softly. "Morning," the boy replied, his voice still groggy. "Hungry?" The boy nodded, and Ethan set a plate on the table. Little Hawk sat and began eating quietly, glancing up at Ethan now and then, as if still unsure how much space he was allowed to take in this home. Tala walked in shortly afterward. Her long hair tied loosely behind her. She looked more relaxed too, though her eyes still carried the alertness of someone who had spent months keeping watch even in sleep. She greeted Ethan with a small nod. "Good morning," he returned the nod politely. "There's food ready. Please help yourself." Tala hesitated only a moment before sitting beside her son. She didn't take much food, but Ethan noticed she didn't refuse it either. She had a calm way of moving, not slow, not rushed, just steady. As they ate, Ethan asked gently, "Did you both sleep all right?" Tala glanced at her son, who gave a small smile. "Yes," she said. "Your home is quiet. It feels safe." Her words settled warmly into Ethan's chest. He wasn't used to people praising his home or his company, and certainly not in such a sincere tone. After breakfast, Ethan stepped outside to check the fences on the north side of the ranch. To his surprise, Tala followed him with a small bucket of feed for the chickens. She didn't ask where she should help. She simply found something useful to do. It's moving naturally, as if she understood the rhythm of ranch work without needing instructions. Ethan watched her for a moment. She didn't act like a guest expecting care. She behaved like someone who believed everyone should work together to keep a place running. Little Hawk joined Ethan, walking beside him with determined little steps. The boy's curiosity was clear in the way he looked at every tool hanging in the barn, every horse brushing against the fence, every rope coiled neatly on a saddle rack. "What is this for?" Little Hawk asked, touching a loop of rope. "That's a lasso," Ethan explained. "Helps catch cattle when one runs off or needs checking." Little Hawk nodded thoughtfully, absorbing every word. Ethan found himself smiling softly at the boy's interest. It had been a long time since he had spoken to a child, longer still since anyone cared to learn about the tools of a ranch. As the morning sun lifted, Ethan repaired a section of fence that had cracked from last night's winds. While he worked, Tala approached, carrying a hammer and a handful of nails. "I can help," she said simply. Ethan blinked in surprise. "You don't have to," she met his eyes. "I know, but helping makes a place feel less like I'm borrowing it." Her reasoning struck him. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to force her presence. She wanted to contribute because she believed in fairness. So Ethan nodded, and they worked side by side, not speaking much, but sharing a quiet understanding. The morning passed smoothly, the sun rising higher until the heat settled across the land. When they returned to the house, Ethan noticed something he hadn't felt in years: an ease in his chest, a gentleness in the air around him. Tala didn't fill the space with unnecessary talking. She simply fit into the rhythm of the ranch, as though she had always known how to be part of something without taking more than she gave. As they had lunch, Ethan asked softly, "What made you choose my ranch to come to?" "There are places closer to the road." Tala paused for a moment, considering her answer. "I heard people in town mention your name," she said. "They said you were quiet but fair. They said you didn't judge quickly. For someone like me, those words mean everything." Ethan looked down at his hands, unsure how to respond. Compliments always unsettled him, not because he disliked them, but because he never knew if he deserved them. But Tala wasn't speaking to flatter him. She spoke with honesty, the same honesty she had used the day she asked him the boldest question he had ever heard. "I didn't come looking for comfort." She continued, "I came looking for a place where my son could grow without fear. Someone told me you would not turn away a child." Ethan raised his eyes slowly. The sincerity in her words touched him more deeply than he expected. He cleared his throat softly. "I don't turn away someone who needs help," he said. "And I would never turn away a child." Little Hawk looked up from his plate and gave Ethan a small, trusting smile. It hit Ethan in a way he didn't expect. The boy didn't speak much, but his thankfulness was clear in his eyes. The afternoon passed with light work, feeding animals, checking the well, clearing branches near the barn. Tala continued helping, not because she was told to, but because she believed it was right. Ethan noticed small things about her. The way she steadied Little Hawk's shoulders when the boy grew tired. The way she handled animals gently. The way she watched the land as if she could read the ground like a map. She had lived harder days than he could guess, and yet she still carried herself with quiet dignity. Later in the day, Ethan saddled his horse to check the far pasture. Little Hawk watched with wide eyes. "Can I come?" the boy asked. Ethan hesitated. The terrain could be rough, and he didn't want the boy to be scared or hurt. But Little Hawk looked eager, and Tala seemed to trust Ethan fully. "If it's all right with your mother," Ethan said carefully. Tala nodded. "He should learn new things," she said. "He listens well." So Ethan lifted the boy gently onto the horse and rode slowly across the open field. Little Hawk clung to him at first, nervous, but gradually he relaxed. Staring at the rolling hills with amazement, "You're a strong rider," Ethan said. Keeping his voice encouraging, Little Hawk grinned proudly. "I want to learn more. I want to help too." Something softened in Ethan's chest. He could imagine this child growing strong here, learning the land, learning responsibility, learning trust. It wasn't a picture he had expected to see, but once he saw it, it felt strangely right. When they returned to the ranch, Tala was waiting by the corral. Relief washed through her when she saw her son smiling. She didn't say much, but Ethan saw the emotion in her eyes, gratitude, hope, and a kind of respect that few people had ever given him. As evening came, Ethan cooked dinner, while Tala and Little Hawk cleaned the dishes from earlier. They worked together so naturally that the home felt warmer than it had in years. It was not crowded, not chaotic, just alive. After they ate, Little Hawk fell asleep quickly on a small cot. Tala stayed at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. Ethan sat across from her. The silence between them was gentle, not tense. "You worked hard today," he said quietly. "So did you," she replied. He nodded. "You don't have to help with everything. You and your son can rest as long as you need." Tala met his gaze steadily. Resting is easier when a person knows they are not a burden. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it softly. He knew what it felt like to fear being unwanted. He understood why she said it. "You're not a burden," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Neither of you." Tala exhaled slowly, a small moment of relief passing over her expression. For the first time since arriving, her shoulders lowered, just enough to show that she trusted him a little more than the day before. The sky outside darkened, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet ranch. Ethan watched Tala stand and check on her son before whispering goodnight. When Ethan finally lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about how much had changed in just one day. He had lived alone for years, believing his life would remain simple and quiet forever. But now there was laughter in his home, soft voices in the morning, footsteps down the hallway, and a woman whose strength challenged the loneliness he had built around himself. He didn't know what the next days would bring. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel afraid of the unknown. He felt curious. He felt awake. He felt something growing quietly inside him, something he had not felt in years. Something that felt like the beginning of a new life. The next few days settled into a calm rhythm that felt almost natural. Even though it was new to Ethan, Tala and Little Hawk blended into the ranch life with surprising ease. Every morning, the soft sound of Tala preparing the cooking fire or Little Hawk's small footsteps crossing the wooden floor reminded Ethan that he was no longer living in quiet isolation. Instead of startling him, those sounds gave him a strange sense of comfort, like the house was finally breathing. Again, after being silent for too long, people in town, however, noticed the change quicker than Ethan expected. Red Mesa was a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the appearance of a quiet Apache widow and her child on Ethan Ward's ranch stirred plenty of whispers. Some curious, some judgmental. Some simply surprised that the man who had refused every woman's interest now had someone living under his roof. Ethan didn't pay attention to gossip, but he knew it would come. He had lived in Red Mesa long enough to expect it. Still, he didn't rush to explain anything to anyone. What happened on his ranch was his own business, and Tala deserved privacy after everything she had been through. That morning, Ethan hitched his wagon and headed into town to pick up some supplies. Tala insisted on staying behind with Little Hawk to help mend the torn sacks of feed. She didn't want to make a scene or draw unnecessary attention. Ethan respected her wishes and left them to their work as he rode into Red Mesa. He noticed the way a few townsfolk looked at him, just a second too long, just curious enough to make their thoughts obvious. Mrs. Hargreen. The baker's wife narrowed her eyes slightly, but didn't say anything. A pair of ranch hands from the neighboring property exchanged looks, but kept their voices low. Ethan ignored it all and headed toward the general store. Inside, Mr. Turner greeted him with his usual friendly nod. "Morning, Ethan," he said. "Heard you've had company up at the ranch?" Ethan paused. He wasn't planning to hide anything. But he didn't care to hear rumors either. "Just helping someone who needed a place," he replied calmly as he picked up a sack of flour. Turner nodded again, slower this time. "Good of you," he said. "Not everyone's so welcoming these days." Ethan appreciated that Turner didn't pry further. As he continued shopping, a young woman named Clara stepped inside. She had tried more than once to catch Ethan's attention over the years. Nothing rude, just invitations for lunch, friendly conversation, little gestures. Ethan had always turned her down gently. When she saw him, her smile softened. But her eyes flicked with curiosity. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "I heard someone saw a woman and child on your land. Everything all right?" Ethan kept his tone neutral. "Everything's fine. Is she staying long?" Clara asked, not jealous, not angry, but surprised. "I don't know yet," Ethan answered truthfully. "That's up to her," Clara nodded, but Ethan could tell she didn't fully understand. People who had always known him as a solitary man struggled to picture him opening his home to anyone. After finishing his purchases, Ethan headed back toward the ranch, relieved to leave town behind. The more distance he put between himself and the whispers, the easier he breathed. When he arrived home, he found Tala and Little Hawk by the corral. Little Hawk was brushing one of the calmer horses, while Tala stood beside him, guiding his hand gently. The boy's grin lit up the whole yard. When he saw Ethan, he called out, "Look, the horse likes me." Ethan dismounted and walked over, smiling despite himself. "Looks like you've made a friend," he said. Little Hawk nodded proudly. "He didn't run away. He stayed still." Tala stepped forward. "He's careful," she said. "He listens well." Ethan could see the calm pride in her eyes. She enjoyed seeing her son learn new things. She enjoyed being somewhere he could grow without fear. The afternoon warmed, and the three of them worked around the ranch. Ethan repaired a loose board on the barn door, while Tala stacked firewood neatly. Little Hawk helped carry smaller pieces, trying to match Ethan's pace, even when the load was heavy for him at one point. Ethan paused to watch Tala. She worked with quiet discipline, making sure every task she completed was done right. She didn't rush, didn't waste movement, didn't complain. Every action she took seemed to be guided by purpose. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind that drew attention. It was the kind that endured silently through long nights and harsh seasons. Ethan found himself admiring that kind of strength more than any words of charm or beauty. Later that day, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Ethan noticed them first and felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. Storms in the plains could move fast and hit hard. He walked quickly toward the barn to check the horses again, making sure they were secure before the wind picked up. Tala saw the concern in his face and asked, "Is a storm coming?" "Looks like it," he replied. "A big one." Without hesitation, she called to Little Hawk, telling him to stay close and help gather loose tools around the yard. They worked together quickly to bring in buckets, ropes, and anything else that might get thrown by the wind. The first rumble of thunder echoed across the land as they finished. The air grew heavy, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Ethan hurried toward the barn just as the sky cracked with sudden lightning. The horses panicked, stomping and backing away from the stalls. One kicked hard against the wooden walls, and Ethan rushed to calm it. Little Hawk followed him inside before Ethan could stop him. "Go back to your mother." Ethan shouted over the echo of thunder, but the boy hesitated. Watching the frightened horse with wide eyes, at that moment a bright flash lit the entire sky, followed by a crash of thunder so loud it shook the wooden beams. One of the horses reared violently, and Little Hawk slipped in the hay, falling toward the animal's kicking legs. Tala screamed from the doorway, "Little Hawk." Ethan didn't think. He moved faster than fear could reach him. In one motion, he grabbed the boy and pulled him against his chest, turning his body to shield him as another crack of lightning flashed overhead. Dust and hay flew around them, and the horse kicked again. Missing Ethan by inches, he held Little Hawk tightly until the horse calmed, then carried him outside into the pouring rain. Tala ran to them, fear written across her face. She pressed her hands to her son's cheeks. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, still clinging to Ethan as if he didn't want to let go. Tala looked at Ethan, then really looked at him, and something changed in her expression. It wasn't gratitude alone. It was a shift in understanding, a recognition that this man protected her son, not because he felt responsible for sheltering them, but because he cared, instinctively and deeply. When the storm finally passed, and the sky softened into a quiet gray, Tala asked Ethan softly, "Why did you protect him like that?" Ethan answered in a steady voice, "Because he's just a child. And no child should face danger alone." Tala studied him for a moment longer before nodding quietly. The respect in her eyes was deeper now, steadier. That night, after Little Hawk fell asleep, Tala lingered in the kitchen while Ethan cleaned mud from his boots. The lantern's soft glow lit the room with a warm golden light. She spoke gently, surprising him. "You did more than save him," she said. "You gave him something he hasn't had in a long time, someone who stood between him and fear." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being thanked for doing what he believed any decent man would do. Tala's voice remained calm but sincere. "A child remembers who protects him, and so does a mother." Ethan felt a quiet warmth rise in him, not pride, not expectation. Just a simple joy that he had made them feel safe. The house felt different that night, not because of the storm, but because something invisible had settled between them, trust, respect, and the first gentle spark of belonging. Ethan lay awake longer than usual, listening to the soft breathing of the two people sleeping under his roof. He had spent years believing he didn't need anyone, and that no one needed him. But now he realized he didn't feel like a lone rancher anymore. He felt like someone who mattered, and that changed everything. The storm left the ranch soaked in quiet the next morning, but inside the house, a warm calm settled over everything. Ethan woke before sunrise, as he always did, but he paused when he heard soft footsteps in the kitchen. Tala was already awake, stirring the fire gently to warm the room. She moved with a kind of peaceful purpose that made the house feel more like a home than it ever had in his years of living there alone. Little Hawk was still asleep on his small cot, wrapped in a blanket. The boy had clung to Ethan for a long time after the storm the night before, and Ethan could still feel the memory of the child's trembling arms around his neck. That moment had stayed with him through the night. Long after the thunder had faded, as Ethan stepped into the kitchen, Tala looked up, her eyes calm but thoughtful. She gave him a quiet greeting. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." Ethan replied softly. The air between them was different, now gentler, warmer, filled with something unspoken but real. After the storm, after what had happened in the barn, Both of them understood that the walls around their hearts had shifted. Even if neither of them said it aloud, Ethan prepared breakfast while Tala brewed warm tea. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt natural, not heavy. It was the kind of quiet people share when they trust each other's presence. Little Hawk woke and joined them at the table. Cheerful again, his fear from last night completely gone. He began talking about the horses, the storm, and how he wanted to help Ethan with real ranch work once he grew stronger. Ethan listened with gentle amusement, offering encouraging replies. After breakfast, Ethan walked outside to inspect the damage from the storm. Tala followed, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. They moved slowly across the ranch grounds, checking for broken branches, fallen tools, and anything the wind might have scattered. As they walked, Ethan sensed Tala was thinking deeply about something. She had been quieter than usual, not cautious, but reflective. He didn't pressure her to speak. He simply walked beside her, giving her space near the corral. Tala finally broke the silence. "I want to ask you something," she said, her voice steady but careful. Ethan hesitated. "Go ahead." She stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a seriousness in them that made Ethan's heart beat a little faster. He knew this wasn't a small question. He knew she had thought about it for hours, maybe days. "When I came here," she said slowly, "I asked you a question that many people would have misunderstood." He remembered the way she had stood by the barn that first day, dusty and tired, but unbroken, with her son holding her hand. He remembered the courage in her face when she asked him, "Do you want a wife? Or just a warm roof?" Ethan nodded. "I remember." Her gaze didn't waver. "I want to ask it again, but not in the same way." The meaning has changed. Ethan felt his breath deepen. He didn't speak yet. He wanted to hear every word she had to say. "When I asked you before," she continued, "I was tired. I was afraid. I was looking for safety for my son. But now I am not asking from fear. I am asking from trust." Ethan stood very still. The wind stirred lightly through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. Tala's voice grew softer, but even more honest. "Do you want someone beside you? Not to fill an empty house, but to build a life with you?" Ethan swallowed, feeling a warmth rise in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't offering herself out of need or desperation. She wasn't asking for shelter. She was asking something deeper, something equal. He took a slow step toward her. "I don't want a temporary arrangement," he said. "I don't want a person who stays because they need a roof. I want someone who wants to share the future. Someone who sees this land the way I do. Someone who understands hard work, honesty, and quiet days." Tala held his gaze with steady eyes. She didn't shift, didn't shy away. "And do you see that in me?" she asked. Ethan felt no doubt, not even a shadow of hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I see that in you every day." Her breath caught, just slightly. Ethan could see her hands relax at her sides. He realized she had been bracing herself for disappointment, no matter how strong she acted. He moved another step closer. "You're a strong woman, Tala. You carry yourself with dignity. You protect your son with everything you have. You work alongside me without being asked. You speak with honesty. You live with courage." She blinked slowly, emotion flickering across her expression, not sadness, not fear, but a kind of relief mixed with hope. "I don't just want someone to warm this house," Ethan said softly. "I want someone to warm my life. Someone I can respect. Someone I can stand with." Tala looked down for a moment, letting his words settle. When she lifted her eyes again, there was something new in them, something gentle, trusting. She stepped closer, so they stood only a hand's distance apart. "Then I will ask you plainly," she said. "Do you want to build a home with me and my son?" Ethan didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let the weight of the moment rest in his heart. He thought of the quiet evenings, the laughter of little Hawk, sound of Tala's footsteps in the kitchen, the way his home no longer felt empty. He thought of how natural it felt to work beside her, how safe little Hawk had been sleeping under his roof, and how different the ranch felt since they arrived. Finally, he answered in a calm, steady voice. "Yes, I do." Tala closed her eyes briefly, as if letting go of a breath she had been holding for years. When she opened them, Ethan saw a softness there he had never seen before. "Then I will stay." "Shh," she whispered. They stood there in the open yard, not touching, but feeling closer than people usually did when they were side by side. It wasn't dramatic. There were no loud declarations or grand gestures. It was simple, honest, and strong just like them. Little Hawk came running from the house, calling out that he had found one of his small carvings under the table. He stopped when he saw his mother standing very close to Ethan, and he looked up at them with curious eyes. Tala knelt and gently placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "Little Hawk," she said softly, "Ethan has asked if he can be part of our family." And I said yes. Little Hawk stared up at Ethan, surprise filling his small face. Then, in the next second, he rushed forward and wrapped his arms around Ethan's legs. It was a hug without fear, without hesitation, full of pure, trusting affection. Ethan bent down and held the boy carefully, feeling something settle deep inside him. Something solid and warm. Tala watched them with tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the feeling of finally being safe, finally being seen, finally being welcomed not as a burden but as a partner. Word spread through Red Mesa in the weeks that followed. Some people were surprised. Some whispered. Some smiled knowingly. But Ethan didn't bother explaining anything. Those who mattered understood that he had not taken in a woman, he had chosen a family. Together, they worked the ranch, 3 people moving as one unit, learning each other's strengths, building trust in each small moment. The house felt warmer every evening, filled with the voices of 2 people Ethan had not known existed only weeks earlier. One night, as the sun set over the plains and the sky turned gold, Ethan stood beside Tala near the corral. She looked out at the land with calm eyes. "This place feels like it belongs to us now," she said. Ethan nodded. "It does." They didn't speak further. They didn't need to. Some stories grow through dramatic events, powerful storms, or battles. But some stories grow quietly through trust, honesty, shared work, and gentle moments that turn strangers into family. Ethan had turned down every woman before because none had spoken with truth. None had carried the strength Tala carried. None had looked at him not for what he could give, but for who he truly was, and Tala, the widow who had walked through loss and dust and long nights of fear, had found a place where she could be herself without hiding. A place where her son was safe. A place where she was respected and welcomed in the end. They didn't build their life from desperation or loneliness. They built it from courage, honesty, and the quiet certainty that fate had brought them to the right place at the right time. Together, they created a home that would stand strong through every season because it was built on truth,